Good morning, everyone, to our live audience here at Chabad of Cary, as well as all those tuning in online to Chabad of Cary's weekly Lunch and Learn. Today's class will discuss the holiday of Shavuot. This weekend, Saturday night, Sunday, and Monday is the holiday of Shavuot, the day when the Jewish people received the Torah at Sinai, the day that we again hear the Ten Commandments and re-accept our Torah every single year. Thank you to Nissan Communications for hosting us online for everyone to see. If you would like to support their work and ensure that we can continue being here every single week, you will notice a donate button on the page, and we very much appreciate your support.
That's on nissancommunications.com.
nissancommunications.com. You will see the link for donating. Last week we had a discussion about the lead up to Shavuot. And I mentioned a mystery. And a mystery is the fact that the Torah does not actually say that our Torah was received on Shavuot. We needed the oral tradition for that, right? The Torah associated the holiday of Shavuot with something agricultural, with counting 7 weeks. It didn't make the connection to the day that we got the Torah. There are two other mysteries for the holiday of Shavuot, all right? And by way of introduction, the Torah is detailed on so many things that we may not find all that relevant, all right? How many people in the tribe of Reuben there was, or names of cities that aren't so relevant to us, or exact locations where events happened. And yet, there's some big surprises. Mount Sinai, we don't know where it is today. Isn't that odd? We know where so many other events are. If you go through the land of Israel, you can have what's called a biblical tour. This is where the binding of Isaac took place, and this is where David fought Goliath, and we know where everything took place, but the most important Jewish event in all of our history, we don't know. We don't know where Sinai is. Now, there are tour guides that will say this is where it is. That's their guess based on the information we have. There was never, though, a tradition passed down where it was. That's odd. And you could say it was never in Israel. So the people went by there and they probably didn't go back there for a while. But there's no markers. There's nothing that tells us this is where the most important event in Jewish history took place. Why is that? That's odd. Why did it not have eternal significance? Why is it not a holy site today? We know where Abraham is buried as a holy site. We know that the city of Tzfat as holy. Why is Mount Sinai not a holy spot? Why do we not know where its location is today?
Well, I can understand why it's not in the biblical text, but I'm really quite surprised that it's not in the oral tradition.
It's not. It's not.
Well, when I think about the receiving of the Ten Commandments, they were told to stand back from the mountain, not go on the mountain and not get near it because it's too holy for human feet to walk on. And it could be desecrated sometime in the future. Misunderstandings about it.
Right. You could associate it with idolatrous practices because it was the one time where there was a physical kind of revelation.
You might go worship the mountain, yeah.
In the same way that Moses, we don't know where he is buried to make him into an idol, so we wouldn't want the same kind of thing.
Could it be that the mountain was just in a spiritual sense? There wasn't really a mountain like a physical mountain?
That's interesting. The Torah still identifies it as Har Sinai, and it talks about Moses going up. So to say all of that is just allegorical, it seems to be a physical mountain. The Midrash does say it was not one of the taller mountains. It was a smaller one to teach us the trait of humility, that the Torah was not given on the biggest mountain. So that is there. There are some physical descriptions of it, but not what cities are nearby or any of that kind of thing. So we have two mysteries. How come the Torah doesn't tell us associate the holiday of Shavuot with the giving of the Torah? How come we don't know the location of Sinai? And let me add a third mystery. When did the giving of the Torah take place? When did the giving of the Torah take place? When?
After
50 days, right? 50 days after they left Egypt on the 50th day. Believe it or not, in the Talmud, there is an argument as to what exact date it was. The reason for that is Jewish months either have 29 or 30 days. They're not regular. And there was an argument in the Talmud whether that month before the holiday of Shavuot had 29 or 30 days. It would throw off the 50 days. Everyone get that? So there's actually an argument in the Talmud whether Shavuot, the giving of the Torah, happened on the 6th day of Sivan or the 7th day of Sivan. And my third and final question is, how in the world is there a debate as to what date the giving of the Torah happened on? Even in the Talmud. We know what date everything happened. We know what date the manna stopped falling. We know what date they entered Israel. We know what date Joshua battled the Jericho. We don't know what date the giving of the Torah happened. That's odd. So 3 mysteries. The Torah doesn't make the association. Even the oral tradition has a doubt as to the date and has to prove it through interpretation and back and forth. And we don't know where Sinai is up until today. Now, this itself really was not part of the lesson, but I was thinking a lot about this week, and Hal, I mentioned it to you. I have a theory. I'm going to share this theory a lot over the next week, so if you're at any of our other Shavuot programs, you might hear it. But one of my theories is why to hit home, to teach us a very important lesson. What is the lesson? That the Torah is not about a particular place. It is not about a particular place. It is not about a particular time, okay? There is not a date. Oh, this is the date that we got the Torah. It's a mystery. Why? There's no date of the year where we're supposed to celebrate Torah. Torah is supposed to be every day. There is not a physical location on the map that we associate with the Torah because Torah transcends places. And that really is today's class. How many mitzvot are there traditionally in Judaism? We know the number. What's the magical number? 613, okay? That's a lot. Why so many? So we're going to mention that today. Where does that number come from? Why not 100? Why not 1,000? Why 613? And why so many? And what's unique about Judaism and the mitzvot are not rituals. Mitzvot are not for certain occasions. Mitzvot are for every situation you're in and every type of person you are, every day of the year. Judaism is not into a token religious experience once a week, or this is my time to have my service to God. It's about being a mensch and being holy day in and day out. And perhaps, I'm not saying this is the reason, I didn't see this anywhere, but perhaps that might be one of the reasons why we don't have a particular date or place associated with the giving of the Torah. And that's left up to tradition, that's left up to interpretation. Yeah, we're supposed to have one day a year where we mark the giving of the Torah. It's important. But not that should be official Torah day. Every day should be official Torah day. Okay.
A comment on the 613.
Yes?
631 adds up to 10. Some rabbi wrote that every one of them, all 16, are contained within the 10 Commandments.
Yeah. And we will actually have, I think today, we have this in today's lesson. I believe we actually, I don't think we do actually. There is a rabbi that wrote a book showing how the 613 mitzvot are all contained in the 10 Commandments. So he writes how these 10 Commandments are umbrellas. And they actually, in Hebrew, are not translated as the 10 Commandments. Aseret hadibrot translate as the 10 dibrot, daber. Utterances.
I've heard before.
Sayings. Speech. There are 10 utterances. Sayings. Each one of these sayings are actually made up of. So that's that's an example. I don't know where the expression, the 10 Commandments, came from. But but that's actually not literal to the translation. For these two reasons. A is many mitzvot find its way into the 10. B is the first commandment doesn't even seem like a commandment. It seems like more of an introduction. We've discussed that on other occasions before. Okay. So we have 613 mitzvot. Oh. 613 mitzvot were given to the Jews at the time of the giving of the Torah, though they did not know about all 613 yet. They were just given a sample. They were just given these 10 commandments. I just said it. They accepted, however, not just these 10, but all of them. So they signed their name and signed the contract even before knowing what's contained. It was only throughout the 40 years that they actually got all of the mitzvot. They accepted the entire Torah, no strings attached, at the time of the giving of the Torah. But up until Sinai, how many mitzvot did you have?
7.
7. And this is from Maimonides is going to read, page 106. These were commandments that were given from the earliest of times to all mankind. 106.
6 precepts were given to Adam. The prohibitions against 1. Worshiping false gods. 2. Blasphemy. 3. Murder. 4. Incest and adultery. 5. Theft. 6. The command to establish laws and courts of justice. Even though we've received all these commands from Moses, and furthermore they are concepts which intellect itself tends to accept, it is evident from the Torah's words that Adam was commanded concerning them. To know it, God added the prohibition against eating flesh from a living animal. Thus there are 7 mitzvot.
Okay, and you need the oral tradition to see how in the words of the Torah these 7 appear. But these 7 were seen as the universal guide to being a mention, to living a ethical life. And what's interesting is number 6 is pretty broad. Number 6 includes having a system that everyone adheres to. You have to adhere to whatever the local, government authorities have, because that's the only way to live in a civilized society where there is a rule of law. What exactly that rule of law is, each place can determine it based on their society, as long as it does not consist of theft, or murder, blasphemy, false gods, adultery. And finally, 7, which is more broad, cruelty to animals. That was only added at Noah's time. Why?
They were eating.
They were allowed to eat animals at Noah's time. Prior to Noah, God instructed Adam to be vegetarian. So it was only when they were allowed to eat meat that there were rules and regulations associated with the eating of meat. Mainly, the animal has to be fully killed before you eat it, and more broader, cruelty to animals.
And that was all
general.
that was after the flood.
After the flood,
Yeah.
post-flood.
Are there other commandments, or do they not count until after Sinai, like
But these are
take
the
care of the sick, the first moon?
We're getting there.
Okay.
This was from Adam and Noah's time.
right, because these are the Noahide laws.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So text 1b, however, says, this was the way it was up until, here goes 1b.
The matter was such that throughout the world until Abraham, when Abraham arose, in addition to these, he was commanded regarding circumcision. He also would pray the morning service. Isaac separated tithes and added an additional prayer service before sunset. Jacob added the prohibition against eating the sciatic nerve and would pray the evening service. In Egypt, Amram was commanded regarding the other mitzvot. Ultimately, Moses came and the Torah was completed by him.
So the matriarchs and patriarchs did have a few mitzvot. Circumcision is the one that's clearly seen, but there are references to these other mitzvot that the matriarchs and patriarchs had. And in Egypt, even before the Jews left, they were told how you mentioned the new moon. They were told about Passover. What else? In Egypt.
In Egypt, what they were told
Yeah. There were some other mitzvot that were given at that time.
about their names,
It says they held on to Jewish names during that time.
circumcision. you said?
Circumcision. So that's it, though. That is really it. Now, these were the ones that Abram was actually commanded about circumcision. The Torah actually says that Jacob, from that point on, they shouldn't eat this nerve on the leg, which is why it's tough to find filet mignon, because of the backside not being. But we also know, based upon tradition, that they did more than just that. They weren't commanded it, but they knew about it. How? Prophecy, spiritual intuition. They knew Torah because Torah, as we've discussed in our Genesis class at the beginning of the year, isn't just a set of laws that was given at Sinai. It's God's own wisdom. It's spiritual truths. It preceded the world. So if someone is really attuned to spirituality, they will sense Torah even before Torah was given. And this is not just a tradition, but the Torah alludes to it, text 2a.
Because Abraham hearkened to my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my...
Interesting. It says that Abraham listened to my voice and kept all my commandments, statutes, and instructions. Which instructions were there? There sure isn't that much in the actual scriptures. What is this referring to? So this is an example in the scriptures itself that alludes to the fact that they apparently were doing other things. This is why you'll have, when the angels come to visit Abraham, there's the hospitality. She tells Sarah to go bake ugot, which is a reference to matzah. There wasn't even Passover, and they're eating matzah because that day was traditionally Passover. Go figure. They didn't even leave Egypt, and they're having matzah. There's hospitality. There is, tradition says they're lighting Shabbat candles. Rebecca lights Shabbat candles. There's many other mitzvot, and I'm going to skip a lot of these texts just because of time, but it alludes to a couple other times where the matriarchs and patriarchs kept the mitzvot. One of them is where Isaac tells his son to go sharpen your tools and go catch some game and slaughter the animals. So there was a ritual slaughter of some sorts that happened, so on and so forth. However, not everyone kept everything. And one of the best examples would be that Moses' mother and father were related to each other. Anyone know how? Moses' mother and father were aunt and nephew. Yes. Yocheved and Amram, everyone's like, that's gross, that's odd, were aunt and nephew. Much later in Torah, that relationship is prohibited. A marriage cannot be of an aunt and a nephew. So here is an example where they did something that was not according to Torah teaching. The Torah was not formally given. Whatever they took upon themselves was voluntary. They didn't have to. They weren't instructed in it. They weren't commanded it. They had an intuition, and some people observed it. And they passed on some set of traditions to their children. But this was it until Sinai. Any questions? Okay. Now we come to Sinai. And at Sinai, the entire Torah is given. Even though the Jewish people didn't learn of it yet, they accept the entire Torah. Where does this number 613 come from? Nowhere in the Torah itself, in the Chumash, in scriptures, does it mention. The Talmud, however, says, I'm going all the way to text 8 right now. Here goes. Jersey, do you mind reading?
Yes. Rabbi Simlai preached 613 precepts were communicated to Moses, 365 negative precepts, and 248 positive precepts. Said Rabbi Hamnuna, what is the spiritual support for this? It is the verse Moses commanded as Torah and an inheritance of the congregation of Jacob. The word Torah equals 611 in letter value. It follows that Moses commanded us 611 and an additional 2 commandments. I'm the Lord your God, and you shall have no other gods. We heard from the mouth of the Almighty Himself.
And you might ask, didn't they get all 10 commandments from all the Almighty? How come just the first 2?
Because their souls went up.
Later Deuteronomy, when Moses talks about the 10 commandments, he recounts that at the time of the giving of the commandments, You told me, stop, this is too much for us to take. We can't handle it anymore. And at that point, I told you the rest. So only the first two did the Jewish people hear directly from God. Let me add one more disclaimer to that. The Midrash writes that at the beginning of the Ten Commandments, they actually heard all 10 from God. But all 10 were first recited simultaneously. We can't understand that. It was just something for the soul to take. After the 10 were given simultaneously from God, then they were spelled out individually. After the first two, the Jewish people said, we can't take it anymore. And so you only have the first and second that the Jews heard in a very clear way from the Almighty. The next 8 Moses had to communicate. And he says, Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Torah Moses commanded us. Torah is spelled how in Hebrew? Taf, Vav, Resh, Hey. Taf, Vav, Resh, Hey. Numerical values of Taf is 400. Taf is the biggest, the last. Vav is 6. Resh is 200. And Hey is Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Daled, Hey. 5. So 5, 6, 200, 400, add up to 611. So Torah was commanded to us from Moses. These 611, Moses communicated with us. However, the first two we heard from the Almighty God itself. This is a hint, this is an allusion to the fact that there's 613 in all. I should note, though, there is significance to the fact that the first two were heard directly from God. Why?
The first two.
Why the first two directly from God? You know, you would think that after the first one, they couldn't handle it anymore. Why the first two? It was important that they heard these first two, because the first two directly from God, in a sense, are the umbrella mitzvot of the entire Torah. Number one is,
Our Lord your God.
believe in a God. And number two is, don't have any other gods other than me. Every positive mitzvah is an extension of mitzvah number one. We do what God wants because we believe in a God that is the author of creation, a God that knows how our lives are best lived. So when a person believes in God, not just a distant God, but a very real God, they'll have a love of God and they'll want to do all the 248 positive mitzvot. The 365 negative mitzvot are all an extension of do not have any other gods other than me. Because really when someone does something wrong, what it really is about is they are having an idol. How? What are they essentially saying when you go against the prohibition? I'm doing what I want. So they are creating another God. They were creating another authority, their ego. So all the mitzvot are extensions from the first two, which is why they had to hear the first two. And this is the allusion to the fact that it is 613. Now let's get into a little bit why this number. It's interesting that there's a tradition passed down that there's 613, and everyone agrees that there are 613. But everyone, Maimonides and many of the other great medieval scholars, all wanted to categorize them. And they agree about 600 of them. Which of the other ones are considered mitzvot? There's actually a disagreement. Not to say that they argue on whether you should do something or not, but sometimes there's an argument whether two things are two different mitzvot or one. You get that? Obviously Shabbat has a positive and a negative, and they're two distinct mitzvot.
The best example we had a couple weeks ago talking about the counting of the Omar.
They're right. And they argued whether every single night was its own mitzvah or whether or not it's one mitzvah. So you have many examples where they will be arguing as to whether something is counted as a mitzvah or not. So that's how they come to a different conclusion what the 613 are. If you go to Chabad.org's website, you can see a list, or any of the Jewish websites, you can see a list of those 613, and you'll see a little note at the top or bottom. This list follows XYZ. Maimonides is one of those famous, but there is another author called the Chinuch who made a different list, and what's unique about his list is his list goes in order of the Torah. So number one would be the first mitzvah in the Torah, which is what?
Procreate.
Procreate. That wasn't even mentioned. Having children. Number 2 might be circumcision. 3 might be not eating that nerve. His will go in order of the Chumash, so it's nice because you can follow it along. Maimonides is more, he wrote, his is more like an encyclopedia. Like the first set of laws all have to do with belief in God. Then comes idolatry. Then comes worship. Then comes holidays. So he categorizes his 613. The Chinuch, this other author, goes in order of the Torah. So there are other authors as well. Okay. Why so many? Why 613? Give me 30 seconds. I want to get another that will help me for this.
Just sing along if you're listening. Talk amongst yourselves. Think of why there might be 613.
When I studied it, I studied for the bones in the body.
The parts,
for the bones in the
parts
body,
of the body.
For all of the bones in the body. That we have 613.
Any questions coming in?
No.
Okay. And please, if you are listening live, we would love you just even put in the chat box that you're here, you're listening, even if you don't have a question. It's always good to hear from people that are tuning in. Why so many mitzvot? So the first explanation we have on this is from the Talmud. Why so many? Rabbi Hanania writes as follows. How?
The Holy One, blessed be he, wished to make Israel
Meritorious.
Therefore he gave them the law to study and commandments to do in abundant measure, as is stated. God desired for his righteous sake to make the law great and glorious.
He wants to give us lots of opportunities to do mitzvot. He could have been a little more skimpy, could have been less mitzvot, but wanted to make it great, wanted to give us many zichut. A zichut is a merit. Now, the question you could have on this is, and that's all nice and dandy if you're following the mitzvot, but it also gives you more opportunities, of course, to mess up. So Maimonides on that Mishnah writes it a little more in a positive sense. He focuses not on the transgression, but on the fulfillment of mitzvot, that there are so many points of entry. And really every person, no matter who you are, does mitzvot. On Rosh Hashanah, there is a tradition to eat a pomegranate. Okay, one of the traditional foods eating on Rosh Hashanah is a pomegranate. There's the apple and honey, but one of them is a pomegranate. Why? It says we're all full of mitzvot like a pomegranate is full of seeds. There was a legend I heard as a kid that a pomegranate has 613 seeds, and then somewhere in second or third grade you find out that that's not so accurate. And every kid in like an observant school goes through that time when Rosh Hashanah where they actually count it. Mm-hmm. And they realize that smaller pomegranates have less and bigger pomegranates have more. In any event, the idea, though, is that every person is full of mitzvot. Mitzvot are not just for the observant or the religious. Every person has many mitzvot. We have so many opportunities to do what God wants, that even if someone says, I'm not particularly religious, guess what? You are religious. You are. You do many mitzvot. Maimonides, text 9, Debbie. B, 9b.
One of the principles of our faith in the Torah is that when a person fulfills one of the 613 mitzvot, as it should be, for absolutely no reason other than out of love for God, he merits the life of the world to come. Regarding this, Rabbi Hanania says that because there are so many mitzvot, it is inevitable that a person will, at least once in his lifetime, fulfill one of them fully and properly. His soul will thus achieve life because of that mitzvah.
There's a certain eternal connection we have when we do a mitzvah all out for the right sake, no incentive at all. And the Talmud goes on and says a little story, and it's surprising because this was someone who was probably fairly religious, and it's surprising that he makes a big deal out of this one mitzvah. But, here goes, text 116. Text 10, page 116.
Our rabbis taught when Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma was ill, Rabbi Shania ben Teradon went to visit him. Rabbi, said Rabbi Shania, how do I stand with regard to the world to come? Is there any particular special act that you have done? Rabbi Yossi inquired. Rabbi Shania replied, I once mistook my Purim funds for charity funds, and I distributed them to the poor. And when I discovered the error, I did not reimburse myself. In that case, I wish that your portion were my portion and your lot my lot.
And it's surprising. That's all the guy did in his life. This one little story. He accidentally gave money that it was supposed to be. Again, he didn't realize. He thought they were charity funds. They were really not funds. And he didn't reimburse himself. All right, that doesn't sound so amazing. But what he said is, that was a time I felt I gave tzedakah surely for the right sake. I made a mistake and I still went with it. And I felt that was done for the right sake, purely out of love, no incentive at all. This is just an example of the fact that there are so many mitzvot to give us all opportunities to shine. Particular.
Possible a person could do something that they didn't know was the mitzvah and the mission of their life.
So can you do a mitzvah without being conscious of it?
Well, certainly, but it does say here in the earlier text that you have to do it properly, and I think there's an intentionality in the earlier statement.
Yeah, and in fact, one of the talks that we're going to have here on Shavuot, the night of Shavuot, everyone gives different talks on Torah subjects. So one of the talks I believe someone is preparing is, how critical is kavanah to a mitzvah? How critical is the intent when you do a mitzvah? Can you do a mitzvah robotically? Do you still get the credit? Obviously, it's not as good as if it's heartfelt, but do you still get the credit? Can you do a mitzvah accidentally? Now, there's some mitzvot where, I don't want to give the whole spiel right now, the whole thing, but there's some mitzvot where we say kavanah is so central that it's nothing if you didn't do it. When you say the first line of Shema, the kavanah is central to it. For prayer, because prayer is about the heart. So there's some mitzvot where kavanah is more central than others. We'll have a whole talk on it. There are some mitzvot that only can happen accidentally. Remember, there's the farmer who accidentally leaves the sheaves behind. There's a law in the Torah that if a farmer drops a few sheaves of wheat, he has to leave them for the poor. He can't repick them up afterwards. So that's a unique mitzvah that the only way a person is able to do it is if they do it accidentally. That's an exception. That's something very neat.
But I would think on the degree of kavanah, it might have to do with how firmly you could say there's a secular basis of the reasoning of the mitzvah. Like, do not steal. Okay, right. I don't have to be thinking holy thoughts to not steal.
Right. So when it comes to mitzvot that are for the betterment of society, there you would say there's a stronger emphasis on the impact on the world more than the kavanah. Charity as well. At the end of the day, kavanah is important in charity, but guess what's even more important? That the other guy gets the help that they need. Which is why, by the way, this is also parenthetical, we're going a little off subject, all mitzvot have blessings. A blessing of a mitzvah is, then what? Asher kidishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu. Those are the words that are recited with any mitzvah. You count the Omer, you say that. You eat matzah, you say that. You light Shabbat candles, you say that. You blow the shofar, you say that. And yet, that mitzvah is not recited when it comes to giving charity or mitzvot that have to do with helping other people. And the Talmud asks that question. Why don't we make a blessing before charity? Anyone know the answer?
You have to do it first, and then.
So Talmud answers, it says it this way, the poor man's knocking at the door. Hey, buddy, I need a meal. And he say, yeah, wait 1 second, I just have to get my prayer book, 1 second, and you're running and you're trying to pay. No, just help the guy. When it comes to mitzvot that have to do with other people, it's not a time for ritual. Just get the deed done. Afterwards, you can reflect on the meaning of it, all you want. But it says even that pause should not be done because that person needs help right now. That's what the Talmud says. You can certainly say a prayer afterwards after giving charity and say a chapter of Tehillim or Psalms, but there's no Asher Kidishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu when it comes to charity. It's just an interesting note. Did you have a question?
No, I was just going to say that on Genesis 18, when Abraham was actually having a conversation with God, in the middle of that conversation, it's just like what you said, he saw two people
Exactly.
So he had to turn around. In other words, he didn't even think about that conversation he was having with God and just.
Because the mitzvah of helping other people came before his one-on-one with God. And that, I never made that connection before. But that makes a lot of sense. No, that's a very good point, and that would run straight through why we don't see it the Asher Kedishanu. So you're right, there is a difference. Kavanah, one would think, would be less significant when the mitzvah has an obvious effect in the world that we can see. Not to say that kavanah is not important, but it would have less of an importance. Again, Maimonides discusses different levels of charity, and when you do it happy or you do it in a reluctant manner, it's much better to do it with a smile. Okay. But now let's dive into the number 613. And I believe you touched upon this before. We're going to expound on it in great length now. The Talmud writes, text 12a, page 118.
Rabbi Shimlai said 613 commandments were communicated to Moses, 248 positive commandments corresponding to the amount of limbs a person has.
Okay. Now, our breakdown in science today might be very different. I don't know. Actually, we do know. The Talmud goes on and lists what they are. So they had some way of categorizing it, and the conclusion was 248. But I think what's important for us is not what is considered a limb and what's not considered a limb, but why they made the association to the human body. And they continue with 365, do 12b as well.
A person has 248 limbs in order to receive the 248 positive commandments. And a person has 365 sinews corresponding to the 365 negative commandments.
This is from the Zohar. The Zohar writes that our very body's makeup is in order to accomplish the mitzvot. By the way, the Talmud gives another reason for the 365. What do you think it is? The Zohar writes about sinews. Again, I don't know the breakdown.
365 is the number of days in a year.
Solar year. The Talmud mentions the days in the solar year. So the Talmud mentions the 248 positive mitzvot and the 365 days of the year.
So the time aspect.
Which would be every part of my body and every day of the year there's a mitzvah. Zohar talks about the body. It says we have the limbs, we have the sinews. Each one has its counterpart. And what's so amazing about this, just for a moment, to close your eyes and think about the fact that I have a physical body and I have physical health, but it is getting its nourishment from the infinite. It gets its strength from being tied up and connected with God. And that is what every single mitzvah is. A mitzvah is not just a commandment. A mitzvah is a connection. A mitzvah is a relationship. A mitzvah is an opportunity to take our finite lives and touch something that is infinite, which is incredible. Everything about us is finite. Everything in the world is finite. A mitzvah is not. And when can we taste a piece of infinity? When we do that. And that is why mitzvot have to do with the tzedakah we give with our hands, and the Shabbat candles, and mitzvot with our eyes, and the tefillin we wear on our arms. We want to take our entire body and say, you're not just a physical finite body, you're spiritual. By the way, this is also why burial is so important Jewishly, because the body is the mechanism through which we do mitzvot. Even though the soul is the godly soul, the mitzvot that we do with our physical body affects our physical body. And it contains holiness in its mark, which is why we don't want to burn the body, which is why there's a natural barrier. It's just... So there are books that give us a breakdown. We talk about the 613 mitzvot. They break down which mitzvot have to do with different parts of the body. And this is just one example from the Kitzer Sefer Charedim. And I need to get a charger to connect this, Debbie. Give me a moment, I'm sorry.
Are we reading
You can read that next text while I...
number 13? Positive biblical commandments which involve the eyes. To look at the tzitzit, as it says, and you will see it and you will remember them. Seeing leads to remembering, and remembering leads to action. To not say by heart those things which are in Scripture. To cry over the death of a decent person, it says, and your brothers, the house of Israel, will cry over the tragedy. This is part of the mitzvah to love a Torah scholar. Negative biblical commandments, which involve the eyes. 1, it is forbidden to gaze at women
In a promiscuous manner.
as it says, and you will not stray after your eyes. 3, to not look at idolatry, which is part of do not turn to the gods. 4, arrogance involves the heart as well as the eyes, as it says, one whose eyes are raised up high. This is part of you shall not stray after your eyes. Positive and negative rabbinic injunctions that involve the eyes. 1, should close their eyes during prayer out of awe of the divine presence before them, or alternatively pray from a siddur. 2, while responding during the Kedusha recital, one should raise their eyes slightly to heaven. 3, he should look to heaven occasionally, as it says, when I see your heavens, what is man? He should have this thought in mind while he gazes upwards. And 4, it is a mark of humility to have lowered eyes, as it says, he will save a humble person.
This is just an example from the book, but the idea is we're trying to bind all parts, all organs and all parts of us to something higher than the regular human experience. And the same way it involves every part of our body, going back to the 365, it's also every part of our life, every arena of life, there's a Jewish way to do it. I don't know, and again, I don't want to see other faiths. Is that out there with other faiths? You mention anything, I will tell you the religious way to do it. Whether
You mean to use any part of any...
not just part of the body, any experience, anything. Whether it is vacation, whether it is business, whether it is commerce, whether it is politics. There is a Jewish spin. There is a mitzvah associated with everything. Look at the way that Midrash writes it, page 121.
You can't say a right way and a wrong way? Can you say
There's
that?
a Jewish way. There's a way to elevate an experience. God asks us to be a holy people, Kodesh. Kodesh means that we don't just do things the regular way. We might be doing a mundane activity, but there is a elevated way of doing it. That there is 2 parts of our life, the mundane part of our life and the holy part of our life. Our Sabbath is holy and the rest is mundane, and we check in every now and then and have our spiritual connection. No, our job is to make the mundane holy. Every physical mundane part of our life, from food to intimacy to whatever it is, there's a Jewish way of doing it. Text 14.
There is nothing in this world in which God did not give the Jewish people a mitzvah. When one goes out to plow, do not plow an ox together with a donkey. To sow, do not sow
Kilayim, which is mixed seeds.
kilaim in your vineyard. To harvest, when you shall reap your harvest in the field.
You should leave it for the poor.
For dough, the first of your dough.
They would give the challah to the Kohen.
To slaughter, you shall give the Kohen the foreleg, the jaw and the maw, when slaughtering animals and birds. And when he sheds his blood, he shall cover the blood with dust. When burying the dead, you shall not cut yourselves. When getting a haircut, you shall not round off the corners of your head. When he builds a house, you shall make a fence and the mitzvah of mezuzah. When donning a garment, and you shall make tzitzit for them.
Okay. Any questions on any of those particular mitzvot?
There's probably in the closest of the religions that came out of Judaism, probably daily laws that these other religious followers must adhere
to as well. No, there is. There's in Judaism the fascination with details, the fascination with every small part, not just the general picture. The way to do it. But you're right, this idea that even the mundane can be holy was taken to other faiths and other traditions. And now we have a new meaning on that Mishnah we said that He gave us a lot of mitzvot in order to give us zachot, to give us merit. The word zachot means merit, but it also means refinement. God gave us many mitzvot that all parts of our body should be able to be refined. You can look at text 15 yourself. I just will paraphrase it because of time. That every part of our body we can elevate to godliness and say that it's not about me, it's about something greater than myself. There are many and varied mitzvot. Each one refines a particular part of our body. We want to be a refined and elevated person. One last part here. Up until now, we've discussed spiritual health. Doing mitzvot is our spiritual health. Every one of our physical limbs gets its nourishment from the mitzvah. That's why it's here. The Rebbe would also connect us even to physical health as well, because our physical and spiritual selves are very much similar. There's a holistic component to who we are. And in different Jewish circles, there's all sorts of different traditions when it comes to healing or when it comes to wearing things that have a good energy, a good spin. You'll hear Kabbalah red strings. You will hear different amulets. You will hear... The Rebbe's emphasis was not to go to the red strings or to the amulets or to any charm or to any... It was to do the particular mitzvah that is already outlined in the Torah and to believe that by fulfilling that mitzvah, it will also bring about a physical healing as well. And I find it remarkable when you go through the Rebbe's letters, and there's a whole shelf of it here. Many times people would ask for a bracha in a particular area of their life that needed help. The Rebbe would often associate it with a mitzvah. Oh, you need better eyesight? Then...
Carrots.
But no, not... Eating carrots are good also. Your eyes need to be...
Looking at the right.
We'll just finish with a few letters of the Rebbe just to see the way the Rebbe looked at the physical and the spiritual being so connected, that it was not just about spiritual health, but physical health as well. 16a.
In response to someone who had asked for a blessing for better vision, mention you for blessing for good health at an auspicious time at the resting of the previous Rebbe. I assume that you hear Kiddush and Havdalah, taste the wine of Kiddush, and as per Jewish custom, dip your fingers in the wine left over from Havdalah, and then pass the fingers over the eyes. According to the holy books, this is a segula or one's vision.
So the word segula means like a merit. The Rebbe always associated segulot with actual mitzvot. Another example, 16b, how?
In response to someone who had asked for a blessing for healthy legs, for a Jew, the spiritual goes hand in hand with the physical. The sages said that the verse which states, and all the possessions at their feet, refers to one money, which puts him on his feet. Accordingly, it is for him to increase in charity in the literal sense, and specifically charity to organizations that are involved with pure Jewish education. For they too are legs on which the entire Jewish people stand.
And this is found throughout the Rebbe's teachings, this powerful connection between the physical and spiritual. And we can just in our own selves, oral health, lashon hara. What words are leaving our mouth that will help our oral health. Tefillin have to do with our mind and with our heart, so on and so forth. So going back to where we began with today, there's no date for Torah, there's no specific location. It is 365, 24/7, every part of our life. Why? In order that we can become godly, every part of ourselves and in everything that we do. Thank you to all those that joined in online. All back issues are, you can watch any of the other classes on demand by going to nissancommunications.com. There will not be a class next week, which is the week right after Shavuot. We will resume again in 2 weeks, and we look forward very much to your feedback, and we would love to hear from you. Thank you for joining in today.
tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. Our weekly lineup of call-in programs includes Computers 2K Now with Amnon Nissan, Health In with Debbie Bruck, Breaking Free with Marilyn Shannon, Lessons of Vietnam with NCBVI members, The Tanya Love Show, Your Healthy Pet with Gisela DiCarlo. And if you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it at www.nissancommunications.com. Sponsored by Atomus.com, makers of quality video recorders and converters for professionals, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.